there is no evidence for this, the far-fetched goals like this. And one of my hypothesis is that such stories are actually created, could be, so not necessarily, so it could be created or used by the propaganda machinery to further their goals and discredit the genuine expose of their propaganda. So, so you say ki, look, they were also saying that Chinese have done it deliberately, and now they are saying this about our things. So you could use one of such conspiracy theories to discredit the genuine concerns about certain things, and so a genuine expose of the propaganda. So that's just a hypothesis. I don't have evidence to back it up really. I don't have arguments to back it up, but that's just a hypothesis, a theory, uh, which you could accept or not, depends on you. Right. So then there are non-distractors. So things like, is it, so you could have questions like, is it being used, COVID-19 is being used as an opportunity or excuse or even a shield to further the already existing goals or motives of the governments as well as big businesses. So more precisely, is it being converted into a tool or support for propaganda? So uh, we need to look into a lot of those news reportings and also see what gets filtered out and what doesn't. So just to give you an example, and just to a warning that it's a recursive exercise, we cannot really jump to the conclusions. It has to be looked rather closely into the language and context of all of this. So is it the case that some of these things, they were already uh, people were already uncomfortable with this, and now it's being used? So sex test ban, by the way, this news itself, if you'll read it closely, you'll see that the news report doesn't carry propaganda devices, but the headline, that's not really very accurate. So there were certain provisions that were suspended, that have been suspended, and the ban is not suspended. Actually, it's the requirement of the hospitals to give the reports that was of the test and the ultrasound test that was done, that was suspended. So it's more sort of slightly more. And then there is the argument how that effectively would lead to sex test ban being suspended, and how hospitals would not follow the things. And so there is an argument towards that, but that's not what happened exactly, right? But then the other news, of course, which now, if you look at Edward Snowden, so I don't know how many of you have uh, gone through his Twitter profile. It's an excellent profile, by the way, and he is one of those few earliest persons who had access to a lot of these back end data that goes. So mm, and there are things that he is flagging, and there are things that he is bringing to the fore, and those are the kind of things that has been happening in India as well. So there's the first tweet, the one that I collected, I think 3-4 days ago. So it talks about how US is, and I don't know if any of you have come across this or not. So we know this happening in India. So they are firing doctors and medical staff who are, or suspending them, who are raising the issues of safety devices and all. This is the article about the US, where they have suspended doctors for raising the issue of lack of PPE available to them. So a lot of private hospitals, and they have put a ban on doctors talking to the media. Very similar to what's happening here. And we talk about, a lot of times we see things and we talk about this, that this is happening in India. So Snowden puts this uh, these different ideas that governments around the world are exploiting the pandemic to monitor us like never before, right? Also that how this is being used as a device for the erosion of democracy and democratic rights. So we are willfully suspending our rights, and we're willfully accepting. Uh, so I forgot that word. So where you, okay. So so we are where you are under constant watch and things like that. So and you could probably look into some of those other uh, news items, some of those discourses, discussions around the world, and try and see how much of this would. So again, as I said, that if I say that because Snowden says it, it's true, that would be appeal to authority. So I wouldn't say that. I would rather say that you look at the language and the context of each of these, and then decide whether it is being used as a tool for propaganda or not, whether it is used as a shield for that. Okay, so finally, what all we can say, not much, and not much that you didn't know earlier. So it's a complex and challenging task for humans. So I didn't get into the question of automatic identification at all. And for humans, it's a complex and challenging task, and it requires a multi-pronged approach to do that. And of course, there are certain kinds of linguistic features. We could call those rhetorical features as well, or discursive features probably, that could prove to be some of the strongest indicators of propaganda. So if there are multiple features of that, it could, with high probability, you could declare it as propaganda. Okay, so that's one last slide, very different from the other ones, right? So that's the expose of this presentation. And it was partially an experiment uh, for me to test if it's possible to train people to recognize propaganda within a short period of time. So the results of the surveys would probably show this, whether it's possible or not. So also you could, tell me now in the discussion whether, so the pre-test was when I started with the puzzle, and then I gave you those definitions of propaganda and those devices and all of that. And then there was a post test where you will ask to change your so opinion on propaganda, and we'll see whether that helped, those that discussion helped in some way in making a more informed decision or not. So of course, this the consent for the test was not taken, and I would not make these numbers and the results public for this, but we could just use it for discussion among ourselves. The second thing is sort of an advertisement. So if you're interested in this, if you want to have more look more into this, uh, I would be offering some unpaid internship. So it's unpaid. It was not supposed to be unpaid originally, but we do have a fund for doing these internships. But unfortunately, the money is stuck in the US because of COVID. So the university is closed. We were supposed to open an account that was halfway through when the university closed. So we don't know when that would be received. So that's why it's unpaid with a question mark. So you may get paid, not right now, maybe later on, say as and when the university opens and the money comes in. Right. So some of the possible areas of exploration would include propaganda in regional media. So that would include regional social media as well, and not English and Hindi, so to say. And so I have a very strong uh, believe that it would be very different in regional media, the way it works out. So at least the kinds of devices that is being used and the kinds of things that is propagated as propaganda. So some of it would be shared, but a lot of things would also be much more local and regional in that sense. Also, we could explore how to train the community for identifying propaganda. So this is not the audience that we have. I don't think this is the representative audience. A lot of us actually are good at this identifying propaganda, but a large amount of population, large number of people, they are not really good. So can we, should we, and how could we train the community for identifying propaganda? And interrelationship, if you're more interested into linguistics theoretical part of it. So how does all this relate to each other? Propaganda, hyperpartisanship, fake news, misinformation, aggression, hate speech. So they are all interrelated, but how do we tease it apart? And of course, if you are interested in computational side of things, then automatic identification as well, you could have a look at those. So those are the possible areas of exploration during internship, but not again exhaustive. So you could come up with your own ideas, and we could talk about this only if you are interested and ready to accept late or very late payments, maybe up to a year late payment, something like that. Okay, or no payment at all, so we don't know, so it's very uncertain at this point of time. Okay, so if you have stayed till now, thank you for staying till now. And if you are interested in looking for data set in Hindi, then you could talk to Shyam, and he is working on propaganda in Hindi for his MPhil. So he has some data sets, and he's still working on that. So he started a couple of months ago. So he would also be a good person to talk about some of those filters and things. So um, and those devices about propaganda, especially when it comes to Hindi. So and otherwise you could talk to me. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritesh. It was a really enlightening talk. All right. Since the talk was so detailed and thorough, let's try to keep the questions a bit short and just like be precise. Let's try to be precise. And one question each person, because we are like really went ahead of time. So, Saurav, since your question is very long, can you like unmute yourself and ask your question? Saurav Ranjan. All right, I'll just ask his question. Uh, do you think that propaganda model has expanded its limit to the extent from where it started acting as an agent of cultural homogenization? Don't you think that the publicity machine that is disengaged from the lives and concerns of ordinary people may lead to havoc?
Okay, so I would again um there are lots of questions in there, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
so what do you mean by uh, publicity? So publicity is not propaganda, that's one of the things. And it may not be, it doesn't have to be, but a lot of times it ends up to be like that. But so I'll try and uh, answer the second question. So I don't think it was ever an also I need to so there is always this need to distinguish between propaganda model and propaganda. So I don't think propaganda model itself was an agent of cultural homogenization. So it never was. And but so the second part of question is, if you disengage publicity machine from the life, the people, that would lead to havoc, right? Is that the question? Did I get the question right? So if you're trying to say that if we make it if we show uh, if sort of if we train community to recognize propaganda, will that lead to havoc, something? Is that the question or not? So I'm just trying to still figure out the question.
Hello,
Yeah.
Ritesh. I wanted to ask you, ki, don't you think that the publicity machine that is disengaged from the lives and concerns of ordinary people may lead to havoc, because this propaganda has expanded its limits to that extent? I am talking in negative sense, where it
Uh-huh.
started acting as an agent of cultural homogenization. In a country like plurality and multiculturalism or diversity it is acting as a cultural homogenization, and also disengaged from the lives and concerns of ordinary people may lead to havoc. I am asking.
Uh, so you see, if the propaganda is disengaged from, so I don't think it is disengaged at all. So it is very much engaged with the lives and concerns of the people. If it is disengaged, it's a failure. So it fails. So unless and until you believe in that propaganda and you work on that, then and then only it could be successful, right? So it doesn't. It's not disengaged from the lives of the people, and none of the, so publicity is one of those things, and propaganda as well. It has to be very very uh, connected. So I'd give you a very loose argument for that, a very broad argument for that. And so you could see that we all try and say that there is a uh, uh, increase in right wing uh, uh, effects, or right wing propaganda has increased and has affected a lot of people. On the other hand, the left wing propaganda has failed to make inroads. uh, why is it that? Because so remember, this is again oversimplification. So it's kind of causal over, there are lots of other factors involved, but this could be one of the factors, that the left wing propaganda was disengaged, it is disengaged from the lives of the people, right? So you could say, of course,
So,
they don't have the platforms, they don't have the money, they don't have this and that, but one of the things is that it is, and the right wing propaganda is not. So that's successful. So in order for it to be successful, it has to be engaged.
no, I was
Cultural.
considering.
So,
Hello.
Saurabh, please, sorry to interrupt, but let's not have a discussion. Let's keep it to a minimum one
Okay,
question. Maybe you can
okay,
discuss
madam.
this
Okay, okay,
online,
okay.
offline after.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
ma'am. Thank you,
definitely you could
thank you,
send an email as well, and we could have
thank you,
more.
thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
So,
Okay.
Nupur was actually thinking that if we can discuss the results of the
Oh
surveys.
yeah, 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 of
Yeah.
course.
In the meanwhile, Shikar has a question. Uh, he's asking that if the computational model can be expanded to detect silence, if that makes sense. For example, media reports not discussing meetings by other religious groups, or only discussing the Jamaati meet, not necessarily repetition but selective reporting.
So selective reporting is propaganda. So and right, so that's exactly how we define it.
Okay.
And so what was the other question? Did I miss that?
No, I think this was the question, that basically silence, like if the computational model
Oh,
can be expanded to counter, like take this into account.
Yeah, if I can just say
uh,
something, I get there is propaganda. This is my question was about the computational model and not the theoretical idea of what
yeah,
propaganda.
yeah, yeah. So no, you cannot detect silence
Mhm.
computationally, and that's why you have to lean back on these devices. For what is there, you could you could go through that and try and figure it out, make a guess. But what is not there, you cannot really do anything about that. So no, silence is something. uh, so if something is not said, it cannot be detected.
Okay. And Ravi has a question. Can you
Yeah.
briefly describe the dataset collection part? It looks very subjective. Yeah, and then he has a request that whether you will be interested to give a virtual talk at QMUL on the same topic. I think Ravi, you can
Yeah,
mail Ritesh about that. But yes, Ritesh, you can answer his question.
so yes, it is filtered, as I said. So the data set collection itself, the examples that I used were probably um, sort of sampled out. And also that we do have so if you mean that I'm it looked biased towards or against one particular specific group. So it probably did, and while making the presentation it seemed to me, but it just turns out that a lot of the propaganda that's there in India, at least in the Hindi newspapers today. So they are from one kind of group. I would try to be more balanced in my examples, but the collection was uh, random. So I just random in the sense that we picked up some of the most read newspapers, some of the most widely circulated newspapers, and also we selected some of the what we could call fringe magazines or newspapers, and we collected equal number of articles from each of those newspapers, the mainstream ones as well as the fringe ones. And fringe ones did involve um, both kinds of fringe, so whatever we could get our hands on. And these were all done, so these were all the things that were available online. So we didn't use the ones that, so for one, we didn't really have access to a lot of those. We needed to work harder, so to say, for getting those. Also that typing and all would have taken time, so ultimately we had to get this annotated and we had to bring this in soft form. So it was, that was one you could say that was one bias that was there, that only those which were available online. But we tried and try and keep uh, the data set as balanced in terms of the opinions, the kinds of opinions that were represented, as well as uh, the circulation wise, so the most read ones and the least read ones, so things like that. So those were the things that we used for sampling it out.
Okay, thanks, Ritesh. So, Ritesh, do you think we can discuss the results, because a lot of people are requesting for the same?
Yeah. I'm just trying to log in into the results. Just give me a minute. So
Sure, sure.
internet seems to be a little slow.
Yeah.
So yes, I'll just share. So what do you see right now? So you see just my presentation, right? So just that screen.
Yeah. Yes.
I'll just try and switch to, okay. So I think I'll have to stop sharing that and share again. Just give me a minute. I'll share my desktop. Can you see the browser now?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the result of the first uh, survey, the pre-test that we had.
Okay.
And right, so as I said, there may not be one answer, and I cannot really pass a judgment on which one is right, which one is wrong. The only thing that we could say that most of the people, or equal number of people, consider the poster on the right as propaganda, as well as both the ones. So 14 has both and 14 has right. So neither was 5, which is good for me. And the only on the left is propaganda is just 5. That was the initial the pre-test results. And if we look at the post-test ones, so 21 people, so that would be that's less than the earlier ones, but it sort of looks like it introduced we now have most of the people. So that's what this does, and this we have noticed a lot of time. So once we introduce this and once we have a discussion on this, uh, we start seeing things, we start seeing a lot of things. And that but we still have two people who didn't see any propaganda anywhere, right? So that's one kind of and that's why how do we train community so that they don't over generalize. So that's a very common uh, thing that we have come across. So we generally start to over generalize a lot of things, but we start saying ki both of those. I wouldn't just still say that it was that straightforward an answer, and there was no, as I said in the beginning, there is no the answer to that MCQ.
Right.
So lot of people saying that both are propaganda. That means that they disagree with my evaluation of things, and there could be arguments beyond the ones that I gave. So there was I think people would agree that there was no device being used in that, uh, hopefully, but I don't know, I'm not sure. So they could show me something which I didn't see.
I don't know, maybe like the use of quotation marks for virus in the right picture, like
Yeah,
making virus a thing which is like quite it's like a jargon that is being used. That could be one kind of marker actually. All right. So Aisha has a question. Aisha, please.
yeah,
Yeah, Ritesh, thanks a lot. I'll try to keep it short. But
yeah,
so the clearly the way that you define for propaganda, but there is a layperson's definition, which let me tell you is a very 21st century definition.
mm,
In the world that I grew up in, it was the communists that did propaganda actually, because I grew up in the Cold War, and
mm-hmm,
and it was an officially accepted term, communist propaganda. There was agitprop theater, which is to get agitation and propaganda, because the word had a different denotation at the time. So I think that one is that people continue always to respond to what is the ordinary denotation
yeah,
of a term. But what your approach does, and I'm not saying it is wrong at all, is really extend this just to mean anything which is polemic, which
yeah,
is doesn't give you full discourse, antecedent and disclosure, has the potential uh, of creating propaganda, to be a propaganda material. So when I responded to your questionnaire the second time round, the fact that there was this straw man apply online, take online classes,
yeah,
and I focused on that. And I said, okay, so it's still propaganda, because the rest I agree is that it's the same devices are not there. But one thing that was being foregrounded didn't have any automatic connection with the spread of the COVID virus, or I could argue. So I was wondering that whether we need a stricter notion, because there can be no snippet of discourse which is going to meet all the conditions that one wants for relevance, for informativeness, etc.
right,
Do we want such a broad definition where really you will lose the effect of propaganda, right or left or democratic or non-democratic? That's different. And is that why you think the term that people are using much more now is fake news rather than propaganda?
right.
So do we need to tinker with that, with the notion of what is the object of study? Uh,
Yes, Asha, I agree. We definitely need uh, So that's one of the big challenges of doing this. So how do you define propaganda? So what could be called propaganda, what couldn't be called? Also, so fake news, yes, but it's not always fake, right? So
No, no.
that's why we also played around with hyper partisanship. So let's see if it's biased or not. But then again, the exactly same questions would raise there as well. So can we really aim to have a completely unbiased uh, narrative anywhere? So then everything would be partisan, right? So that's one of the things that needs definitely needs so it's
Hmm.
something like we see it and we understand it. We know that it's one it's propaganda and this is not, which something clearly is not. There is a lot of middle ground where we are not sure. A lot of people will say that it is. A lot of people will say that it's not. So and we don't know how really to get hold of that, tease that apart and say that this. So and that's why this. These devices. So we thought that let's
Hmm.
just uh, limit it to the presence or absence of those devices. If those devices are used, then it's a good indicator for propaganda. If not, then it's not. But yes, you're right about your uh, analysis about that poster. So COVID has nothing to do with online classes. Uh, at least for most part, but then it kind
I
of
mean,
get
all
deassociated.
information is propaganda in some way, right? All information is propaganda because you're not going to cover the entire chain of reasoning. But there is something malicious about the. I was thinking that the foregrounding and the backgrounding
Yeah.
and the transparency of the process of what is foregrounded and what is backgrounded, that there is some chain of reasoning that can be inferred existed in a conclusion.
By looking at
These,
the thing that we
by
have.
looking at whatever
Mm.
it is, even if the whole information isn't there,
Mm.
is that the thing. So I'll give you an example. Somebody forwarded me on one of these WhatsApp groups.
Mm.
There is a photograph of Queen Elizabeth standing completely alone and wearing
Mhm.
some blue hat and blue dress, and her head is slightly inclined. And Nietzsche, there is a thing written that until this day I have not bowed my head for anybody but Narendra Modi. Okay, right? And there is no Narendra Modi in the picture also. It is. I mean, she's not even. I went and checked to see whether it was the same clothes that she was wearing on the day, and there was nothing. So no, that and something like the poster you had on the left, which I would agree, if it hadn't been that red herring, I would have said that's not propaganda. There has to be a way to grade these two.
So the second one is I think that would be fake. Can we call that fake? Uh, so grade and differentiate, yeah. So gradation, so there were some decisions that we also took because we were thinking from the perspective of automatic identification, but then we realized that let alone automatic identification, that humans are not able to identify propaganda, and there was so much
I
disagreement
understand.
among people. So uh, then we said ki let's first decide ki kya hai ye, and
Ah,
oh
oh,
yeah,
there's a,
there must be some way of distinguishing the two.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good. I mean, it's a great effort, and it's a great attempt to try and approach it from both a theoretical angle and, but perhaps we end up with
Yeah.
too
So
much diagnostic.
that needs to be So we were making these categories, and we said, "No, this is different from the other one. This is different from the other one. This looks different." We already had reference points, so there were 7 to start with. So some literature long ago, 7 propaganda devices. So they were basically logical fallacies that
Yeah.
they had put up as propaganda devices. We said that we need more out of this. So that's how it sort of expanded. And yeah, it seems a lot of also a weird mix now. So it's not the classification, the basis of classification is not uniform. So some of the classes are based on something else, something. So it's a mix, and it
I think
needs
what you
some.
need to do is Paninian blocks of rules.
Yeah,
Just think of that. That you need an identifier, first of all, of some kind that will give you a sieving device. And then if you can make the blocks out of these diagnostics. Because, logical fallacies are quite frequently completely non-propagandist. They're just because
yeah,
people are dumb and don't make and so if you could have them apply to a much smaller subset of things that have been used as identified as propaganda, if you want, by other means.
okay. So yeah, that could be one way of
I mean, I just off the
but
top of my head, it's not something I would know.
no,
Anyway,
no.
I won't take
So
up too much time. We can have a chat on the email if you have more thoughts on it.
yeah, sure.
All
Thanks
right.
a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Ritesh. It was an amazing talk, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And
Yeah,
yeah, so we'll see you in the next talk then, everyone. Goodbye.
yeah. Sure. Bye. Hopefully, I've not confused everyone more.
No,
No,
no, it
no,
was
no.
really nice and very clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.